having someone turn their actions around to be the other person's fault.
I think one of the hard things is like your ego, right?
I want to say from the girls' side, and if y'all didn't get to watch it, Miss Beverly, when she defined the difference between rape and sex, like literally that was one of the best parts of the conversation, because it literally had that exact conversation with my coworker right afterwards when we were talking about something. She was like, oh, well, why would you have so-and-so be a part of it if they're a virgin? And I was like, what does rape culture and sex have to do with anything? Like, I'm just trying to understand why you see the two as linked. And so definitely, I feel like the key takeaway is like emphasizing there is a difference between rape and sex.
I just appreciate the men that were there and the men that are here today talk about like faults within like what we do as men and Black men, and like how we like uphold misogyny and how that conversation sort of went, as well as like actionable steps we can take forward. And I just hope like those conversations can be revisited.
Yeah, we talked a lot about, I guess, like what we're socialized to view sex as, and like sexuality, and how a lot of it begins from a very early age. And it's things that we, you know, we don't think of it very consciously. It's just like subconscious. And then also we talked about like a lot of the language surrounding sex and how it's violent. So.
Really, I liked looking at the insight from younger people, really, because, you know, people my age, my generation, we're getting to the point where we're going to need to step aside and let you guys take the reins. And so just really hearing your input, and also looking at the generational curses that generations before me have passed on and that have been passed on to me, and that we're trying to break from passing on to you guys. So looking at you younger people, realizing that those curses are being broken, albeit slowly, but we are breaking them and having those real, honest, and robust conversations. So I really liked that, you know, being the granny in the room.
I think that I was the one who brought up the topic of coercion because I think the original question was, when did you learn about consent? And I think my answer was that I learned it a lot later in life because of the like blurred or more nuanced things like coercion. And for the guys, I said that my perspective or my definition of coercion is like withholding or changing or altering somebody's consent, either before, during, or after, relations with them. And just those like little nuances about was it sexual coercion or condom coercion? I forgot the exact thing that I brought up, but the act of like removing one's condom without the other person's permission is like a form of coercion and a form of sexual assault. And how I didn't learn those nuanced things about consent at a prior age that I wish I knew, because those are the things that can be easily manipulated on both parties. So that's just the origin of the conversation, at least from the female's perspective. And I just wish the like other side knew some of those nuances, that it's like not okay to try to change someone's mind, or not being okay with somebody changing their mind about their consent. Again, either before, during, or after. So that's something that I like. I know like a lot of men already know that, and I know there's a lot of respectable men, especially here, after seeing you guys' side and you guys' perspective about consent and how that's like discussed amongst parties. But I think that that's something that I think that should be more openly discussed for sure. Like it shouldn't be something that we shy away from. With it, especially when you're trying to have sex with this person, right? So why not have an open and honest conversation about where their consent lies? And that's something that that came up from that conversation. So yeah.
I feel like men casually just don't talk about consent amongst other men, because men definitely talk about their like not just their sexual advances, but like how they talk or like their experience with women a lot more than women think, if I may. And in a lot of those conversations, we don't really hear like people talking about consent. And for those who are privileged enough to go to universities or colleges under their respective state, I feel like that's when they begin their first like instruction. But even learning about consent is almost labor, because I feel like, well, from my experience in particular, you weren't able to enroll in classes if you didn't learn or click through a lot of these things. You know what I mean? And it isn't until like you are called out on it, and then you hope that young man, or however they choose to identify themselves, like grows from that situation, or like isn't, you know what I mean? Or if it's not too late at that point. So I just feel like a lot of men don't, they don't understand like what coercion is. You know what I'm saying? As long as they feel like they aren't specifically physically holding someone down, they feel like one of my experience at least, feel like a lot of things are okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree with the last person. Personally, I didn't even learn about coercion until coming to college. And then we took workshops and stuff on just how to be like, follow like school guidelines and regulations and stuff. And upon learning about coercion, that was like kind of new to me. It's something that I inherently kind of already knew like in the back of my head, but I just like never knew a word to describe it. And so I think of myself as a pretty progressive person. So I think that even shows like how definitely there are other people, especially men, who have not been educated on coercion and what can count as coercion.
I was going to say, just kind of piggybacking off the fact that it seems like the education doesn't really start unless you're fortunate enough to go to higher education type thing. I think that's like the initial issue at that point, because it's like, well, I guess not all schools have like health class and stuff like that where they do teach about sexual health. But even for the ones that do, that's something that needs to be brought up when we're a lot younger, just to have that pretty much ingrained into our minds. Because I can agree that I didn't even realize that certain things were coercion until I made it like taking those the sexual health or the sexual harassment whatever in college and stuff like that. So it's just like innately, I don't know, we just don't necessarily think about it until and then it's also like, okay, it's like knowing that something is kind of off but not also having a word for it. So yeah, just teaching it when people are younger, I feel like is really the issue that it is, or is where the issue lies.
Yeah, I was going to add that, yes, consent training, education needs to happen much younger, and which is why we are targeting about 5th grade. But the other thing, the other side of this coin, is that we, in teaching against coercion, we also have to give young women power to consent, to say, yes, this is something I want, without holding a burden of being fast or being a hoe or, all of that. We have to not just teach our men to have to play this game so we're not seen a certain way, to be able to hold agency as sexual beings, and to be able to say, yes, I am into this. This is something I want. Let's explore this together, and not feel like there's going to be a repercussion on the other side. And so as we're training our men, we also need to train society to say that we as young women can have sex, can enjoy sex, and not be tainted because of that. So I just wanted to put it in that we as a society need to also change the language, giving us permission to be sexual beings.
Yeah, y'all raised a lot of great points. And one thing that we talked about in our breakout was how so often we view sex as a conquest. And that's a lot of why coercion happens. You feel that you have to make those advances and keep pressing on. And there's so many societal, so many cultural things at play. When you think about, as Ms. Beverly said, talking about like girls being fast and not having, or being labeled fast and not having the agency or the conquest piece that from like playing hide and go get it as kids, just stuff like that you don't even think about until you get older and you're educated. And then on the flip side, it's also like the shame that comes with when we talk about like sexual assault or rape. Like, it's a taboo topic in the first place, but like if you're somebody who are a survivor, whether it's a woman or whether it's a guy, like there's a lot of shame that goes in with that. So just like on all sides from a societal, cultural level, there are a lot of things at play that contribute to coercion and contribute to the shame that exists in terms of like people, sex and sexuality and sexual assault.
I definitely want to add the agency part and the taboo. Like, those two are playing so hard together. It's just like you almost can't have one without the other. Like, you won't recognize that women can have agency, and you also don't want to talk about it when their agency is taken away from them. So it's definitely those two words that are what I really pulled out of what both of you have brought up.
I say it's interesting when you talk about it in like the context of like culture, because if we live in like a culture that was formed from like colonization, we barely talk about that. About all the violence that happened for us all to even get here, to even be on this call together. So how do we, I guess, expect it with like, if sex is already such a taboo subject, if we haven't figured out how to like healthily communicate just coercion, just that kind of violence, that conquering in all aspects of like our lives as like people, then how do we, start that in that space, in such an intimate space as well?
I just wanted to touch on what we talked about last time, with kind of how consent can change at any moment, and like men dealing with our ego and having to be able to check ourselves and being able to know that it's not just a yes here, and it's that being how it is like throughout the whole interaction. It can always change, and being able to be comfortable and respecting your partner. And
to address a bit of your question, Nigel, I feel like a lot of it kind of touches on what like Noye said. A lot has to do with pride. A lot of men feel like if once I have a yes, once that yes is just good and good for however long that relationship or situation with the other partner is and should be. But again, that's just taboo. I feel like, if I'm just being quite honest, men are very prideful and very egotistical when it comes to that. You know what I mean? Just like I said, as I mentioned before, we talk about it as like a violent act. Like I think we talked about it last time in our conversation, Mike. Even how men describe sex, like smack or like crack or like did you hit? You know what I mean? Like even the ways we talk about sex amongst one another, like. Again, it needs to be checked. And I would be remiss in saying I don't do these things, you know what I'm saying? But again, it's just being mindful of these things and just learning to unlearn these things. But I honestly feel like it kind of starts with yourself and this conversation you have with your friends. Like, if you can't talk about this with people you love and you're close with, and people that's supposed to like have your back, then who else can you talk about this with,
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that maybe a first step that could be taken is, again, that education, because it establishes kind of that conversation and breaks down that barrier to help it not be so taboo, where it's if the teacher can talk about it amongst the class, and so now it includes more people on that conversation, that allows it to not be such like a weird topic and something that might be seen as off limits to people to discuss. And it helps bring it up at a younger age, whether it's in high school, like in biology classes where you learn about sex and stuff like that and reproduction. I think that could be an appropriate time to possibly discuss it, and how it can be connected to like how sex could be taken like too far. And
it just reminds me of what we talked about very briefly at the very end of our conversation last week about accountability, and the accountability that we have like amongst our friend groups. Because even like what Demonte was talking about, like I do think it's possible to have your friends also be your teachers and to be teachers of your friends. And I think that like that can also be part of like the education process. So it doesn't always have to be like a teacher and a student in like this like classroom setting. Like I think that we can talk about these things just like regularly, and that should be more so normalized. And so as far as like changing rape culture,
I think part of it has to be like allowing ourselves to like not be so prideful, like to be humble to our friends teaching us.
Yeah, for sure. And just to build on the education piece, I mean, your first real education is at home. And the way that we can begin to teach kids about things like consent in an age appropriate manner is just simple things like, can I get a high five? Can I get a hug? And if the child, I'll use the example of like my nephews and my niece. Sometimes they come over and they don't want to give me a high five or they don't want to give me a hug, and they don't have to. And just teaching kids that they have that agency from a young age, and kind of there are always power dynamics at play, but enabling them and giving them the knowledge and the understanding that they have agency even when their elders, are around.
And just to add to that point, I think that one of the main problems that leads to this culture is just the objectifying women. From a very young age, we learn that women are a prize to be won or a conquest, or if we do these things, then we'll quote unquote win them. And I feel like that's reinforced in the fundamentals of even being a child. You're watching these Disney Channel movies that have that all enforcing it to the music that we listen to. And I think that just that in itself creates a very toxic environment for women.
And I feel like something we talked about in our conversation as identifying males was like how we uphold misogyny and the ways we do that. We talked about like music and things like that, but we also touched on how women that we grew up in or grew up around also uphold misogyny. And I just wanted to know how people felt about that, ways they might have seen it or like even been a participant in that.
I think I shared this last week as well, is that growing up, I was the one who was forced to always cover up wearing a swimsuit. Like I couldn't go swimming in just a bathing suit. I had to wear a t-shirt and shorts because I was seeking the attention because of my body. And that was reinforced by my stepmother and my grandparents and things like that. And so that's an example of when the elders and the women in our lives are perpetrating that culture onto us, that like, because we just want to wear a regular bathing suit, now I'm forced to cover up because I'm asking for it by revealing what is a normal part of my body.
To add on to that, it's just kind of like, that's how you can see the full circle of the culture, where that's a response to the culture existing. So in a way, they're trying to protect you from that, but at the same time, it's perpetuating and basically adding on to it. So that's how you can just show that it's not that necessarily that people want to be doing that, but they think that they're helping you or they're protecting you from that. And by taking away your agency, that is supposed to be beneficial for you. And I think that's not a good way of looking at it for sure.
Well, I can just say like generationally, like we have a granddaughter. My granddaughter loves her grandpa, loves him, and she always wants to come and hug and kiss on him and sit on his lap. And and even though he is a wonderful person, would never hurt anybody, the love that she wants to give him, like he has to sit on, or she'll sit on the arm, he'll sit her on the arm of his chair because we don't have little girls sit in our lap. And again, it's just this thing. We know he's not going to hurt her, but it's just a thing that we do that's ingrained even in him. Like he can't have his own granddaughter sit down and watch a movie sitting in his lap because that's just not what we do. So now we have to set her up on the arm of the chair. Do I absolutely perpetuate it. Like when I cook, I fix his plate. He gets food first. And we're 54, but it's a habit that's not going to get broken. When I cook dinner, I make his plate first. He eats first. All of that. And that feeds into the misogyny, right? It does. And I know that I'm doing it. I also do it as a sign of respect. But again, respect from what? Right? Because this is what I saw my mother do. This is what I saw my grandmother do. Those uncles that everybody knew not to leave us alone. You can't leave him with so-and-so. Again, we feed into that. And so I just say that to say, not only do we recognize it, like even now, I'm still perpetuating that, even though in the back of my head, I know better, but still we have to set up systems that make our young ladies safe.
So what would people think those systems would look like? Like, I'm hearing a lot of like education, but what are some other ways? Like, how do we shift the culture around, blaming the victims rather than actually holding accountable the ones who were the perpetrators?
I think it like would require us to really look in the mirror, and I don't know if we're all ready to do that, because like you said, like there are certain things that we do still do, and we don't want to have to face that the way we've been living life as a culture, as a society, whatever, even individually, might be wrong and needs to shift. Because like to change somebody it requires like a lot of like self-reflection and understanding. So I don't know, I guess usually when things like that happen, I feel like we need like some big huge event to get people to like snap awake, but I don't know what would snap people awake enough to start shifting the way they think.
And I also have a follow-up question to everyone for that. For example, I was working with a woman and she was saying how she hates the song WAP. And she's like, I don't let my daughter listen to it. I don't let any of my kids listen to it. It's perpetrating misogyny, this and this. And I'm wondering, what is the line between, okay, we're empowering, but now, oh, we're being misogynistic because women rappers are saying this now. And I'm like, how we're taking agency over our body, but it's being seen by the older generation as a problem. And so where is the line for us to be able to do what men rappers are doing without perpetrating a problem that is already prevalent?
I feel like inherently the fact that that's the issue in the first place, like where it's just like it's being discussed, oh, like women are trying to take, like the fact that that's something that needs to be discussed is part of the problem in itself, if that makes sense. Because it's just like, why is there so much criticism? Literally, why is there so much criticism when you really do hear this and that or whatever from every other male rapper? And yeah, there will be some type of like, oh, okay, like this is super explicit, but that's pretty much it. Like, is that it is super explicit, but then it becomes a whole, like, you got to go and people are literally critiquing and just digging in and analyzing every little thing when a woman wants to say basically the same thing, I guess. So I don't know. I'm gonna just say like that's an issue in itself.
Yeah, I agree. So I agree with Logan because I'm like with Logan with the whole like I've heard men say way worse things than Cardi B has said, like way worse in songs, and this is like years ago, not even today, like years ago, like we have been saying some very out of pocket stuff. So I truly never understood why, like, I never understood why that it was a discussion when you have not only one male rapper, you have like 30, 40 saying these things, very, very out of pocket stuff. I never understood that, but I think that it's the whole goes back to the culture of not us. We look at women differently, like they're not allowed to say that, and within our culture, they kind of aren't allowed to say that. So it's like when that comes out, it's like even how Logan added the whole discussion of bringing it to attention that they're taking an agency. When a man released that, we're not saying that. We're just like, oh, that's the new hit song. We just brush it off. He could make 100 songs saying some crazy stuff that we just gonna bop our heads to without thinking about. So it's definitely a double standard, and that's definitely a reflection of the misogyny that's like deep within our culture.
Well, it's also very, I mean, I find it to be hypocritical because I know a lot of my friends are the group that you guys are talking about. And I remember, they're like, I can't believe it. I mean, just like some of my good friends, they were clutching their pearls, about to fall out on the floor. And I'm like, girl, I was at the club with you when we was listening to Trina. Let's not forget my neck and my back. And they're like, they forget. And what it is, it's, we get to a certain age and we think that, we've evolved and now we're doing this and, we drink wine and we do wine tasting and we forget the stuff that we did when we were your age. And yes, when Trina came out with that, I mean, I was at the club with them. Before we did Bible study, we did club. That's what we did. And so it's a level of it's a level of just being hypocritical, right? It's saying that these young women are they're out of pocket and they're saying these things and doing these things. It's all the same stuff we said and did. We just went to church on Sunday after we did it. So You know, just you young people need to know that a lot of our sins we try to hide or we try to mask, and our shame is put on you, and it's not yours to own. It's not yours to own. So I'll just put it like that. A lot of what you hear is just flat out hypocritical.
I'll say something as well as that. When it comes to even pictures and whatnot, back in the day, how they had the Source and Word Up, and those are magazines that were by men, and you had women on there that were half naked, and it was not a problem because it was putting money in men's pockets. But now we have Instagram, and you turn around and a woman chooses to do whatever. Oh, she shouldn't post that. Oh, she won't find a husband. Oh, this can't. But if it's benefiting them or making money for men, it's not a problem. But if we choose to do, oh, you're showing all, you're not leaving anything to the eye. But if that's what somebody chooses to do, that's what they choose to do. But if it's on the cover of a magazine or on somebody's CD cover or in music videos, and you got somebody walking around half naked, they on top of you, whatever, oh, it's good, it's gravy, everything is fine. And so that's also the same thing, to where nobody didn't say nothing when people were on the cover of Vibe and they was going to the pockets of men, but all of a sudden, because now women can do it and they can profit off of it, then here's a whole nother problem.
So it sounds like there's a lot of, like, in the culture, it's like a lot of hypocrisy, a lot of shame, a lot of projection. Like, those are all the things that kind of, like, those become like the perpetuators of it unconsciously.
I mean, I think of OnlyFans, like you said, you could be on the cover of Playboy back in the day, and it's going into the pockets of Hugh Hefner, rest in peace. But then now when women want to do OnlyFans, it's a problem. And it's like, so we're profiting for ourselves. Y'all don't like it. But when another big company is doing it, it's just okay. So definitely, it's just the hypocrisy part is really, like, coming out. And I love all these women rappers. Like, personally, I love the agencies that they're taking. I love what they're saying. I love all of it, because I'm like, men have been doing it. And honestly, at least they're not saying things like how men do trigger warning. Like, men have referenced rape in their songs. They have referenced all these types of out-of-pocket stuff that is extremely triggering. Never called on it. I remember J. Cole said a lyric one time that had to do with rape, but I was like, this is out of pocket, but nobody cared. But women, it's all our songs have been about us taking back our agency and doing what we want. Like, I know Meg always says, like, I'm not going to do anything I don't want to do. Like, she said that in multiple songs. And so it's like, she's giving us the education that school should be doing.
It's really funny because I remember there was this one time, like, there was like a higher up or like an administrator that I worked with or whatever, and he was talking about the twerk music video by City Girls. And he was like, I was told that there's a lot of similarities between the music video for Twerk and Tip Drill by Nelly. And I really had to be like, I can see, like, okay, yes, there's a whole lot of ass shaking, but it's completely different. Like, hella different. Like, those women are having a great, you can literally tell that them women are just having a fun, great old grand time, versus Nelly talking about, I'm not trying to see, like, it must be her ass because it ain't her face. I need a chip drill. Like, that's completely different.
I just wanted to touch on, I guess culture's been coming up a lot. Music has been coming up a lot. And its ability to keep us pushing forward. But we tend to see kind of a backlash, whether it be like older generations or just people who want to keep similar traditions. We see the backlash there. So I think it's pretty interesting to see who exactly agrees with a woman coming out and expressing herself and having other women who feel comfortable and actually look happy in a music video, and seeing kind of like where the pushback is, and old traditions, as well as also finances. I'd never really thought about rape culture and how control of a woman's finance in her agency in that way is also a part of the conversation. So that was a really good takeaway I had.
Something I kind of take away from the conversation we've had thus far is just not only just like this idea of agency, but like men trying to like control women's bodies or profit off women's bodies. And when the shoe slipped on the other foot, not necessarily flipped on the other foot as women making money off of men's bodies per se, but literally just having the agency to do so for themselves. It's like, I don't know, World War III to be like be beefy or anything about it, because I just feel like once men see that women have agency, you know, that's when you start to really see this resurgence, like resurgence of like these gender roles, an unspoken inherent gender role that's been like in our culture specifically for decades. You know what I'm saying? 4 generations for that matter at that. So how do we like? Again, like, do we look for someone in the culture to address these things? Like, we talk about music a lot. Do we expect musicians or to hear in the music or just film adaptations and things like that?
Lori Harvey, that's who comes to mind to me, because literally I see all the time people calling her a hoe, people calling her a slut because she's dating around and having her own agency where nobody has heard her speak. I couldn't tell you what she sounds like. And it's like people are making up these narratives, and it's mainly men. Men are the ones saying like, oh, why is she bouncing guy to guy? Like, you don't know what she's doing. You don't know if she's dating these guys or anything. And I really appreciate that she hasn't spoken on it, because she doesn't have to. It's not anybody's business. And it's just the fact that like, when it comes to changing the culture, I think that's a way of her changing the culture. The fact she's refusing to address what people are calling her, even though she may or may not agree with it, she's minding her own business and showing like, I have agency to date who I want and you're not going to stop me.
You know, to add on to DeMonte's point and to just add on to everybody's point about it being a double standard, it's kind of like you analyze in one way how men, I'm just speaking for men specifically, how we talk about women in our songs, right? And it's like when Cardi B and these women put out these songs and are like dressed the way they dress, isn't that what we want? Isn't that what we done rapped about? We get this, we get that, we get that. So why are you mad that they're now doing it on camera? Isn't that what we all wanted? Isn't this is what we're singing and rapping about? So I just don't see it. Just like, okay, I'm gonna be mad because I'm not controlling them being in my video. They're controlling their video and making the decisions. So when they're controlling it, it's a problem. But if Lil Baby didn't put whoever in his video, we just gonna brush it off. It's like even mentally we don't notice it. Nobody is talking about it's naked women in basically, I want to say 75% of music videos nowadays in some aspect. So that's definitely a very, very big double standard.
Yeah, going off the controlling thing, I feel like a lot of men especially kind of get angry at this sort of movement because they feel almost like they're supposed to have that type of control over women, and this movement is society kind of taking away power from them through this. And so I feel like that's one source of negativity and backlash that comes against it from the other side. So
Yeah,
people feeling like they deserve it or should have it in the first place, control over other people's bodies.
I think we need to learn how to, I guess, mind our business, but we also need to learn to not mind our business when it involves people getting hurt, people not doing the right thing. Like, we're really selective on when we want to mind our business. Like, I guess when it comes to like judgment or like judging out how other people live their lives, as long as it can make the person saying it feel righteous in whatever type of way, and that's what the community feels righteous about, then it's like, okay, now I can say something. But in terms of like, if you don't know or if you're not sure that you're going to have community support, then you won't call out things that are bad. And I think that needs to be something that really needs to be changed.
Yeah, and I just want to make the point that, like, you know, as much as we talk about on a cultural level, you know, it's obviously not just us. I think it's in any culture, especially those that have been impacted by, you know, European, you know, Western values. So beyond even the cultural level, there are institutions and systems that enable men to feel that they have control over women's bodies and that don't hold men accountable. And when it does hold men accountable, it's not in a way that reduces the harm that they've done, but rather in a one that's punitive, and one that doesn't discourage people from, you know, from those types of actions. So it's one of those tricky things where I'm like, I know the, like, you know, the domination that men have over women or that people have over each other, is so intimately tied to what Bell Hooks calls white supremacist capitalist patriarchy. But it's like, how do we even dismantle that in particular? Like, that's something where I'm even just like stumped, you know? So if y'all have any ideas as to that, I would love to hear it.
I mean, something that comes to mind for me when you say this is like, I think about how racism really contributes to this issue a lot and how even white women are perpetrators of it. I remember I was talking to a coworker and I was talking about Meg, and she was like, well, actually, country music is the most empowering music for women. Like, have you heard what they say? And I was like, what do you what do you mean? Like, do you hear what they say also in rap? And she was like, no, country music is where it is. And it's just like, we see that it's white women sometimes who are talking down on these Black women rappers as well and pushing that narrative too. And it's like white people are just pushing that racism and like, oh, it's just trash, or oh, it's this and this. And it's just like, okay, like, why is it that they get to decide what is empowering and what's not, or what's acceptable and what's not? So I mean, that doesn't directly answer it, but it just reminds me of the racism and like how they still have a say over what's culturally acceptable and what's not.
I feel like, well, as a person, I've listened to some country music, and she may have said that because in country music, they tend to not use a lot of like sexual innuendos and things like that. She might have said it's empowering because a lot of the times in country music, it's a woman basically doing quote unquote things that they consider a man would do. And that's their way of showing women empowerment, which that's also a way of being empowering. But also I think being sexual can be a way of being empowered. So I feel like people need to separate just how they think how women should be empowered from the different ways women can empower themselves. There's different types of ways, and there's no necessarily wrong or right answer. Or
there's a couple of things I was gonna say, and I couldn't get my thought together. So there's two different thoughts. So when we talk about white women and why their space of being so uncomfortable with our sexuality, they're just uncomfortable with us, right? Because before they were the standard of beauty, and that's changing. And because it's changing, you know, there's things that, like, you know, I go to the gym, I work out 4:30 every morning, and you know, some songs come on, I might do a little old lady twerk or whatever. The little old lady, oh my God, I wish I could do that. Yeah, you wish you do, but you can't, you know. And again, it's them, that uncomfortableness is just what they're looking at themselves, right? Because the standards of beauties are changing. People are getting thicker. People are liking our thickness. They're liking, you know, just everything that is a Black woman. So if I were white, I could understand that wanting to hold on to something, losing it. That was one thought I was having. And then the other thought I was going to, in talking about like women, like that women power thing, right? Sex has been selling since the days of Dorothy Dandridge and Marilyn Monroe, but the money's always gone to the people in power. And when people in power start losing power, that's fear. So all of this is fear-based, right? You're afraid of losing that power. You're afraid of losing the thing that makes you special. And if people understand, like, really, I have all the power. And my daughter was cracking up because I said, I can have only friends. And she's like, Mom, stop it. You know, and just like that thing, but it's just owning that power. That's the fear. That's the thing that makes people uncomfortable. That's what makes, you know, the records executives uncomfortable, because the money's not coming to them anymore. So those were the two thoughts. I just couldn't figure out how it tied together. It just popped in my
again, letting your friends be teachers and not letting that be like taboo. I feel like a lot of people has their own respective opinions on the institution of like school. I mean, respectfully, you know, I understand that. But especially when it comes to men, again, that's just what I have known and interacted with a little bit more. Not being prideful of letting your homie teaching you something or putting you up on a game or just having a casual conversation and it not feeling like laborious, you know what I'm saying? Or feeling like oh, like, bro, I don't want to talk about this right now, but it's like, we're gonna talk about it now. When are we really gonna talk about it? You know, if I'm just being honest, like when men like get together, like we talk about everything else, you know what I'm saying? And the fact that we can talk about our relations that we have with like different partners, you know what I mean? But we can't talk about this or something. That's something like I feel like it could be a step in the right direction, just moving forward as like a culture as men.
Another thing I also feel moving forward with communication would be feeling more comfortable with calling people out, especially your friends, because I know that a lot of people, when they're around their friends and their friend says something problematic, they'll kind of just brush it off or accept it because they just want to fit in. They don't want to be the type of person to call someone out on it. And so I think that's something that needs to change moving forward, because the amount of times that I've heard like a group of guys just like almost make a joke of consent, like they was like, oh, like, do you have my consent to, like, I don't know, touch my arm, or like, oh my god, like you're too close or whatever, like before COVID, of course. And so I feel like that almost creates an environment where taking things like consent or coercion or those type of topics seriously is almost something that could be you could be made fun of. And so just kind of making an environment where calling people out is something that people feel more comfortable doing is something that would hopefully change going forward.
I also believe like giving a hand clap to those for making positive and healthy choices, because I know like for my friend group, for example, if one of my friends, if it's somebody who does her wrong, we're all like, okay, you know, let's step in, let's have a conversation, like, oh, we want to say something to this person or whatever. And I feel like sometimes we forget to do those hand claps for healthy situations to empower our friends to be like, okay, you're in something healthy, you're handling this appropriately, like kudos to you for acknowledging like, hey, this other person may have not been that person or may have been toxic or whatever the case may be, or you know, you've moved from this past situation, and let's give a hand clap when people do find their own happiness, strength, a lot of that. Because I know a lot of times we focus on, oh, as a friend, I'm gonna step in when is this person doing my friend wrong, or when there's been a wrong situation. And sometimes I feel like we may need validation when we are healthy or somebody's treating us right, because you're like, you're not used to that. You're like, wait a minute, somebody's not abusing me or doing the wrong thing to where, is this how it's supposed to be? And it's like, yeah, it feels different because somebody's treating you how you're supposed to be treated, and you may not have experienced that before. So also having those, like everyone was saying, but also less when we do see something good, like, okay, girl, I see, you know, okay, you happy, I see you good with your peoples, let's clap for that. So then it's that feeling of like, oh, this is what it's supposed to feel like, I'm doing something good, let me make sure that other people are feeling that. Or if I notice, hey, something's off, I'm sort of kind of have this idea of what is the right when we've seen so much wrong.
We give our young men a lot of mixed messages, and it's not fair, right? We hold you up to a standard that's hard to attain. And we're asking things from you in so many different ways that it can be confusing. And I'm glad that some of you young men that are here, and I know the friends that you have are gonna learn differently because of who you guys are. But don't think like all of this is just something is just wrong with you. You guys are given so many mixed messages as to what's strong, what's virile, what, you know, even what we as women want, because we're not allowed to really tell you. And so I just give you guys hand clap and kudos for being here and changing that narrative, but understand that I see that what we're doing and why we're here. So I just wanted the young men to know that part.
I think something that really stuck with me, I forgot who said it, but it was about how before, when they had women dressed up basically almost naked on magazine covers and CD covers and things like that, and how it was fine because it was putting money into the pockets of those men who are in that industry. And then now that the women are kind of taking those things for themselves and kind of doing it for themselves, and how now that was a problem. I thought that was a really interesting dynamic that I, again, kind of thought in the back of my head, but I didn't really connect those two pieces of how that is affecting their money and is backing up that fear behind that. So
I think I'll add, for me, it's just kind of going back and relearning a lot of information and moving forward, changing, I guess, traditions. Born in like a Nigerian family, like a bride price is like even still in the conversation in some of my like family members. So just relearning things and changing past traditions for the better future generations, you know.
I learned that we have a lot of work to do, but it's really, I've been seeing, I guess it's interesting having internet now, like as a culture, because I feel like it gives us the agency to change it in real time. Like it's not really set in stone. So I think having discussions like this, even like carrying out this discussion like social media or just in our communities, we really can see a shift quicker than we realize.
Well, thank you all for doing this. We are so appreciative. I really enjoyed today's conversation. I felt like I got a lot from it. I hope that's the same for you all.